output?
No, I made it clear last time I'm not ready to accept the closure. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be able to take a final committee stage call, one of many in this bit on the title and commencement clauses on this, because, Mr. Chairman, as you yourself alluded to, that this is a piece of legislation that is going through under urgency, that it is the job of this House to ask questions, and it is the job of the government and the Minister and the Chair to answer those questions when those questions are put in this chamber. That is what we are elected to do, Mr. Chairman, and it's what we're paid to do. And I'd actually like to hear from some government members to get on their legs and to actually examine the legislation that is under questions. Because, Mr. Speaker, in regard to the title clause of this legislation, I have some questions for the Minister and the Chair. The legislation is entitled the Social Housing Reform, Flexible Purchasing and Remedial Matters Bill. Well, Mr. Chairman, I would like the Minister to direct me to the parts of this legislation that are going to act in a remedial way for the current housing situation that we face. I have read this legislation, Mr. Chairman. My colleague, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, suggested some reading for opposition members, and she suggested they start with the bill, because it clearly wasn't on their reading list of things that they'd examined before they'd come to the House for this debate. But I have read this legislation, Mr. Speaker, and I cannot see anything that is going to be remediating in terms of the housing situation. My other colleague, the Honourable Annette King, in her earlier contribution on the title clause, drew the House's attention to the advice of the Law Commission, that we actually do title bills in plain English ways, in that the titles reflect what it is that a bill is doing. And I cannot find anything in here. I cannot find anything in here that is going to address the very real concern that the Honourable David Parker talked about in terms of the trend we are seeing towards camping grounds in New Zealand, with the ultimate outcome being the United States having 6%. When in Christchurch, in terms of this, and I would like to know what is in here for a city that is facing a very particular set of housing circumstances, what the remedial measures in this piece of legislation are for there. That we actually have a situation in Christchurch where some of the homelessness is caused by the fact that a number of our camping grounds, where people were previously being directed, have now been converted to workers' accommodation. That rather than being places where people who are under housing pressures can go, this is where we are now housing rebuild workers, and that is putting further pressure on it. I would like to know what clauses in this bill are going to be remedial for the constituents that I'm seeing in my office. I want to know what clauses in this bill are going to be remedial matters in terms of social housing for my constituent who was threatened with eviction from her Housing New Zealand house in Hoon Hay because in 2 years after the February earthquake, she had her daughter and her 3-month-old granddaughter living in a caravan on the property of her Housing New Zealand house, and Housing New Zealand tried to evict her because they said it was not right for her to have a caravan on that property. They were prepared to see this whole extended family, who were under extreme housing pressure, to be in a situation where housing was something that was simply beyond their reach. I want to know what clauses in this bill that the title purports to propose remedial matters are going to do for that family. I want to know what remedial matters are in this piece of legislation for a constituent of mine who is currently in emergency temporary accommodation, and because she is classed as being in emergency temporary accommodation, the DHB will not proceed with her hip replacement surgery, because they do not consider that she has a safe place to go back to once that surgery is completed. I have not seen anything in this legislation that will do anything to remediate those situations. We've had other ministers who have sat in that chair through earlier stages of this bill who have waxed lyrical about how this is going to be the panacea for housing. But, Mr. Speaker, we are still struggling, and I would like the Minister to get up on her legs, to address these questions, to tell the House this is a committee stage of this bill where it is the job of the Parliament to ask questions of the legislation. We'd like some answers to those legislations. How is it that this government thinks that it can bring a piece of legislation called the Social Housing Reform, Flexible Purchasing and Remedial Matters Bill to the House when there are no whānau remedial matters. Many of my colleagues have suggested alternative titles for the legislation. Another of my colleagues, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, has also herself drawn the fact that the attention, Mr Chairman.
Sarah Dowie.
Mr Chair. Mr Chair. Mr Chair.
Jacinda Ardern.
Chair.